Hi and welcome back to Painting with Yuk-Sem. My name is Yuk-Sem Won and I'm going to be bringing you through step by step to do an acrylic painting of a blue heron in silhouette in front of a pond. So I'm using acrylic paints and I like to add a little bit of water just to be able to get that consistency to flow through. So what I'm going to start with is some white with some water, and that's just going to, and I'm going to go right at about 2/3 and add just some nice horizontal lines of white. You can't really see it yet, but now without washing my brush, I'm going to go and pick up some of that yellow. I'm going to add it on top of the white, but what it's actually doing is that because I'm painting over the white a little bit, it's actually blending that paint right on my canvas. So I'm going to come up a little bit, and then I'm actually going to come down and go a little bit into that white. And what it'll do is that it'll give you that nice natural blend of colors right on the canvas without too much effort. What I want to do is have the sky be mirrored in the water. So I'm going to go and get that yellow, same thing as I did before, and then where I had that white, now I'm going to come in and do that yellow line down here, a little bit on the white and a little bit, and then I'm just going to blend it up a little bit into that white and then come back down to get that yellow. So however thick I want that yellow to be, I'm just going to make sure that it's a little bit wider than what I actually want, because we're going to keep on doing that layering of the colors. So I'm just going to bring that yellow up a little bit, which means that in the bottom in the reflection, we're going to make that come down just a little bit more without washing my brush, because there's still some yellow on there, which I'm going to use for, to my advantage, because now I'm going to go and get that orange. So I'm going to pick up some orange with a little bit of water just to make it thin enough. I'm going to go half on that yellow and half on the new canvas, so that I'm picking up a little bit of that yellow in my color. And then I'm going to bring it down a little bit to blend it, and it's picking up that yellow, and the more I go over it, the more it'll blend it. And then I'm going to bring it back up, and then now that I have that blend from the yellow up to the orange, I can go and get a little bit more of that orange and have that one layer of orange that doesn't have too much yellow in it. So for this painting, I'm really trying to keep the horizontal lines, horizontal lines, in order to get that vastness this way. I don't necessarily, if you want height, you do the vertical lines, but because I want more of a length look to the background, I'm going to keep them nice and horizontal. In the same way that I started it up there, I'm going to come down here. If your yellow ends up drying, or that color that you want to blend into it, all you have to do is on your brush, if you pick up some of the first color at the top and the second color at the bottom, what ends up happening is when you go over it, it'll give you that automatic blend of colors from your brush right on your canvas. So then if I come over and like this, now I have that wet yellow and some wet orange, so then I can go and get the orange, bring it in, and I know that that yellow is wet enough for me to be able to do that blend. So then I'm going to come up on that yellow a little bit and then go back down. And because I want the orange to be about that thick, I'm going to come down and just do one layer of that orange, just a little bit more, because with our next color, I want to blend it as well. So I'm going to come up here, add a little bit of that wet paint with the orange, and then I'm going to go right into the red. So now I've just picked up the red because I have that layer of orange on there, half on the orange, half on new canvas, just to be able to get that line where I'm blending. I'm going to bring that paint up, and then I'm slowly just going to blend it just pressing very lightly on top of that orange, and you'll see that that line actually disappears as I come across. If there's a hair, or in this case a piece of dried paint, if you tried to get it with your finger, you're usually going to run around and make a muck of it. So what I usually end up doing is, if you take the brush, the bristles will go around it, pick it up and get it right off there, and then you can just come back in with your brush stroke. That sometimes will save you a lot of running around after one of the brush hairs all over your painting. So in the same way down here, my paint's not too bad, so I'm just going to get a little bit of orange on one side and a little bit of red. So the orange is going to go on the orange, the red is at the bottom, and come in, and by going over, you get that one line, but as you go across a few times, it'll actually, and you can move up a little bit and down, what it'll actually end up doing is blending that line, so you have that nice seamless change of colors. Now I can go in just in the red and come in and do this. So instead of painting, as you can see, I've always painted the bottom of my easel. The easy way to do this is if you take your canvas and you flip it around, what you can do now is just come in here and you can get that bottom of your canvas, which is now the top, get that all painted without mucking up your easel. Get those nice cross strokes on there, and then you can take it and you turn it back around, and now the bottom is painted and you have your new bottom that doesn't have your red paint all over your easel. So now that this red is there, I'm going to come in and just finish it off with a bit of the red. Because this is a really bright, vibrant cadmium red, what I do want to do, however, is after I've got this layer on, in order to subdue it a little bit and make it just a little bit less absolutely in your face kind of red, is once you have it on there, my brush still has red on it. What I'm going to do is just going to dip it into a little bit of that black, and then I'm just going to run that on the top, blending it in on the canvas, and then bringing it down in the same way that I did before, just to give that darker, a bit of a darker feel to the top, giving it a little bit of depth, so that you don't have that bright, bright red. If you wanted to keep it, it's fine, but I find that on the edges, usually when you're hanging the painting, if you have too much of a bright red that's always there, it's really hard to match it with different things that are in the house. So if it's a bit more of a subdued neutral red, by adding gray, or you can add black or green to it, the complementary color, that'll make it a bit easier. So I'm just going to mirror that just a bit on the bottom. But what I'm going to do is use it to my advantage. So again, with a little bit of that black, I'm going to come down to the bottom. But because down here it's water, one of the easy ways that we're going to do it is that by doing those horizontal lines on each side, what I'm going to do is just bring some of those up, but not do it all the way. So I'm going to use those as some of the reflections, just to get that water, that start of a water line going down here, right into a little bit. So when you're doing water, if you start going up, or if your lines are actually tilted, even just a little bit, your eye will catch that, and it'll look like your lake is tipping out. So if your water's not looking quite right, chances are that it's not level. It's really important when you're doing the water that your lines always try and match that bottom of your canvas to really get those horizontal lines that are parallel because the minute you start going up or getting too much of a curve in it, then it'll start really looking like there's either more of an ocean look to it or something like that. So now I'm just going to take it and run just to blend in a few of those brush strokes, right like that. All right, so now that the background's done, now I can wash my brush off. So I'm using just straight water. The reason that you want to wash your brush and you want to wash it really well is two reasons. Is the next time you use that brush, you don't want either red, orange, or yellow to come through, or if you're using a dark color and then you go into the white and then all of a sudden you have pink or light blue where you don't want it. So you always want to wash your brush really well. And the other thing is that whatever paint is in there will actually dry, and acrylic is somewhat of a plastic polymer, so it will harden and ruin your brushes. So you really want to make sure that you don't have any paint left in it, because that'll make it hard. One of the ways they do sell some soaps that you can buy to save your paintbrush, and it'll, if it's dried paint, it'll actually take some of it off, so you don't have to worry too much, but it is always easier if you just take care of it. So what we're going to do here in the sky is that we're going to start building in just a few of the clouds. So I'm using a round 1-inch brush, and I'm going to come, and because this is yellow, I'm in the orange, I'm going to use a little bit of the red, so I'm just going to bring whatever color it is, I'm going to bring it down. So because of it's yellow here, I'm just going to get a bit of the yellow, but a bit of that orange. So what I'm going to do is just turn my brush horizontally and come in and just do a couple of nice horizontal brush strokes. The other thing that you want to do, especially when you're doing in the sky, let's say that they're clouds, is that you don't want to have little brush strokes like that. You don't want it to look like just a paint stroke. You really want to be able to get that natural feel of that cloud moving. Once you have a little bit of an idea, even if you see that you have too many, if you add a bit more paint to it or a layer, then you can actually build up the shape. Here, because there's a lot of cloud, what I want to do is maybe I'll just add a little bit of substance to it. So all I do is I go in a rounded at the top of the cloud, and then at the bottom I'll just bring that into a little bit more of the straight. So here's the rounded ones, just a few of those bubbles. The bottom of the cloud is going to be nice and straight. As I go more into the orange, I want that red to come down, so I'm going to pick up just a bit of that red. Do the same thing, bring some of those nice long strokes into some of the clouds, the sky here. Here, I want to balance it. If you have something on this side, you have to have something going on the other. So that's when I'm going to add some of those bubbles on the cloud. At the bottom of it, that's when I'll just sweep over them and flatten out that bottom. And because here I'm going more into the red, I'm just going to grab a touch of that black and be able to maybe start right about there and bring in some of those clouds up here, just to give that nice triangle shape. I'm going to wash the brush because I'll show you a tip to get some highlights and lowlights on those clouds. Because the sun is actually down here, it's setting or rising, but the sun is near the bottom. What you want is, I've added the darker color to the top of the clouds because that's what's in shadow. What you want underneath is that highlight. So I'm going to change my brush to just a smaller detail brush, And what I'm going to do is under the cloud, I'm going to use the lighter color that's under it to highlight. So on these clouds, I can use the white with a touch of yellow in it. And then at the bottom of those clouds, I'm just going to do a couple of those lines in that lighter shade. And what that'll do is that'll highlight them and use the darker shade as that shadow. And if you have clouds that are completely in the light, you can always just make some of those light ones show up there. So now with the red clouds, I'm going to want to use the yellow and the orange to highlight them. Get some of that. Highlight that bottom. A bit of that yellow. In some of those areas, you can drag it out a little bit just to have some, let's say, there's a few clouds here. And then in the same way, up here on that darker cloud, I'm going to want to use the orange with a bit of that red to do the highlights on there. And that's an easy way to add some highlights and natural shadows to your clouds. So one of the things when you're doing water, you might want to just add a few of those ripples in the water that match the colors of those clouds, just so that your eye picks up that, oh, maybe there is something that's being reflected. So where I have a bit of orange and yellow actually coming through, if you just add that in the water, it doesn't have to exactly match, but it gives you an idea, and your eye will pick that up, and it'll look a little bit more natural. So now that we have our background almost all done, I think that looks okay. So we're going to start doing the reeds. One of the things with the reeds is that if you use a very thin brush, you can use your little detail brush. But what you have to do is get a really thick, when you have a thick paint, you have to add enough water to really turn it into a thick ink consistency. And that's so that when you have a big brush, when you're adding paint to it, there's a lot of bristles, so there's a lot of paint in your brush, and you can get a nice long line. When it's a small brush, there's only a few hairs to grab onto that paint. So you have to be able to make that paint thin enough that you can grab enough, but really stretch out how much paint you have on there. So one of the things is I'll show you here. So if I were to do one of the reeds, before I run out of paint, I can do the whole line. Whereas if I used a thicker paint, and just like the straight acrylic that I use, chances are is that I can't even get maybe 2 or 3 inches from where I started, and I'm going to be running out of paint, because the water actually gives you that that ability to keep on going with that really nice long brush stroke. So if ever you're doing reeds and it gets a bubble in it, just go over it. All you have to do is thicken it a little bit and it'll be fine. The other way when you're using a small brush is that if you turn your brush as you're painting just a little bit, that'll give you not only a more natural line, it wiggles it a little bit, but it'll also spread that paint as you're going. So that's if I were to use an itty bitty brush. What I'm going to do is a longer bristle on my brush, but it's still fairly small. So by adding water to it, I can come in now and get some nice long grass going. And that's just a matter of patience and playing with the water and the consistency of that paint in order to get the right one to be able to come in, because you want it almost to be that one brush stroke. Because the minute you start getting 2 or 3 brush strokes in the reeds especially, and the same thing on branches, is that then it starts chopping them up. And one brush stroke will always look a lot nicer. So I'm just going to add some small ones. And you'll see that as I'm painting here, I keep on adding water because I end up seeing the texture, especially when you're doing silhouettes. If your water, if you haven't added enough water, you'll start seeing the texture of your canvas. And with a silhouette, that will really break it, and that's where you start going, oh, well, there's something wrong with that part of the painting, and chances are it's because you're seeing through the object instead of really having that dark shadowed silhouette of it. So I'm just going to add a few more here. One of the things when you're doing the reeds, they don't have to all be straight. Very few of them will be really, really straight all the way up. They'll always get some kind of curve. Sometimes they have the leaves coming through. The leaf can also just come up straight. Try and get a few different ones, different sizes, different lengths. If you try and do them all the same way, it'll be very unnatural. So the nicer, more natural looking grass, or if you wanted to do some cattails or something like that, the more variation and a little bit of movement. Remember that the tops, as they get longer, that gets heavier, so that's when they start leaning over a little bit more. So you won't have one that's absolutely straight. There's very, very few of those in nature. You'll always find that there's a bend somewhere in it, and that'll give you a nicer feel. So let's say that right about here, we're going to have one that comes up, and that's going to be the wooden one. And then, because the wood is a little bit more sturdy, we should be able to get a bit higher. But I also want this to be a cattail. So the cattail, you don't want for it to be too much like a hot dog on the stick. So it's always easier to start small and add to it than to make it too big and then try and make it smaller. So I'm just going to add the sides, just working on really getting a nice blend with the space and the movement of the reeds, because on this side I want it to bring the eye over to this side where we're going to have that heron. So I want to make sure that here I have enough of that grass that really points that way without being too obvious. So now that we have the reeds, I'm going to do a few more in the back that are smaller. Remember, they're in water. So down here, and I'm going to remember to keep it nice and horizontal, I'm going to, where I have a thick clump of the reed, I'm just going to do little horizontal lines to be that reflection. And then you can come in, and wherever you had some of those thick ones, at the bottom of each of those, it might have a bit more of a reflection where the water's kind of joined up together. like that. Where you have a leaf that's coming down, remember that in the water, that will be reflected as well. So you want to have that almost being that mirror reflection coming up. All right, so I'm just going to add a few more. Let's say there's a little island of that grass or the weeds that's come in here with maybe some leaves. All right, and then we're going to get to the heron. So the same thing that I did before is that we really want that liquid paint. So it's almost like a black ink. And I'm going to come in and start with where I want that head to be. That neck's going to come in as an S. And you see I ran out of paint, so I went and got some more watered down paint. Come in with that backwards S for the neck. At the bottom here, I'm just going to widen it a little bit. And after you have your shape, you can always come in once it's dry and add a thicker black paint, and that will really give you that silhouette. I'm going to add in that first chest piece. Actually, I'm just going to use a bit of the bigger brush just to start this area. There's that first breast, and then it's going to come down into that second one, which is its tail and back. Get a bit more of that black so that we can get that nice silhouette. And then just going to add a bit of the butt there. Now I can come back with my detail brush and some water. What we're going to do is get his leg on there. Bring that one really nice and straight down all the way to the water. The back one, this leg, is going to be coming forward. There's his ankle into the claw. That's going to be touching the water like that. And we're going to go into the head, have that beak. That's a really nice thin line underneath of the head. The head actually has a flat front, and it's going to come into the neck. And you can play, it's easier to make the head bigger than it is to make smaller. Add just a few feathers coming out of the back. Get that neck and the back. Add just a few touches for those feathers. A little bit of that shadow horizontally coming in, and just like that we have the silhouette of the heron in front of the sunset. So I hope you enjoy and that you can take some time to try it out, and then I'll see you next time on Painting with Yuk-Sem.